Good morning, everyone. I would also like to extend my gratitude to the organizers and for having me, and also for doing these fantastic conferences year after year. And I think it was, one of you said it was like coming into a family, and I also feel that way. I hope you will be patient with me as a family when you listen to this as well. So, the context of this paper was already mentioned in the introduction, and this is a forthcoming volume that explores how photography in the decades before and after 1900 became a tool for women's independence in all the Nordic countries, in Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. Our subject belonged to the first generation of women image makers with the power not only to define their own and other women's representation, but also to establish their own view of the world through photography. So all our chapters are based on archival studies, and this paper that I will present now addresses the experience in itself of encountering a photography archive. So, sometime in the mid-1890s, Elisabeth Helmer, who worked as a studio photographer in Grimstad, which is a small town in the southern coast of Norway, gathered her studio staff to pose for a group portrait. The resulting image bears witness to how she consistently employed women only as her co-workers. Helmer was known for her strong social and political engagement. And as an act of solidarity, she gave other women opportunities to pursue careers at a time when most male photographers still were reluctant to let their women assistants take place, as they said. Helmer founded a local branch of the National Society for Promoting Women's Right to Vote in her hometown, so she was a suffragette, and she was elected as a member of the city council, which was not normal for women to be elected into at the time. Also, she contributed with a chapter to a volume on the town's history, where she emphasized women's lives and their achievement over generations. And not least, she promoted a social climate in which women photographers were welcomed as independent scholars, professionals. Helmer not only welcomed the way her hometown had a growing number of independent women as entrepreneurs and business owners, she also applauded the new possibilities for women to read papers and books and to become educated rather than just getting married, as she put it. Like many other women photographers at her time, Elisabeth Helmer remained unmarried. Notably, her political and professional efforts mark the beginning of an almost century-long continuous history of women photographers in her hometown, where one followed in the footsteps of the other. Helmer's first successor was her co-worker, Gunhild Larsen. She's the one you see with a foot on her ladder. She was going her own ways always. And in 1911, 2 years before Helmer withdrew from her business, two newcomers on the local photography scene, the cousins Therese Frivold and Hanke Niversen, announced the opening of their studio in Grimstad. They were in business for 6 years, but had to close their studio in 1917 as one of the cousins lost her eyesight and the other got married. But then, yet another local woman photographer, Martha Myrslo, became their successor, and thus also the last in Grimstad's long line of women photographers. When she opened her studio in 1917, Myrslo already had many years of training behind her. She ran her own studio in Grimstad until she retired 84 years old in 1970, so that was a long career. After a lifetime of producing portraits of generation after generation of the small town citizens. Everyone knew her, and her studio became a landmark, a prominent site when arriving the small town by boat. Myrslo was also known for being the preferred photographer of Grimstad's most famous resident, author and Nobel Prize laureate Knut Hamsun. Interestingly, the city, Grimstad, prides itself for being a city of poets. As Norway's internationally celebrated playwright Henrik Ibsen also lived there for some years in his youth, when he wrote his first drama while working as a pharmacist apprentice. It's not really much to boast about when you think about it. But in contrast, Grimstad's role as a woman photographer's town is a less known history. Today, the archives left after these women are deposited at Kuben, which is a regional museum and archive. The archive they left behind consists of between 40 and 50,000 exposures. Approximately half of these are glass plate negatives. Based on my experiences while working on this archive, my paper will explore how the possibilities of uncovering the histories of the early women photographers and their practices are conditioned by Joan Swartz has turned the archival encounter. Swartz reminds us how the archive in Foucauldian terms tend to be perceived as a regulatory mechanism for the ordering and production of knowledge and as a sort of hegemonic power. However, contesting such categorical conceptualizations of the archive, she points to how critical academic understandings of the power of the archive have ignored how archives not only serve as tools for external forces, such as, for example, governmental power apparatuses. She claims that the archives themselves also play an important role in exerting power by shaping the extent, nature, meaning, and preservation of archival materials available. Accordingly, she states that it is ultimately the archivist who decide what is preserved for historians to discover in the archives. So, how then does the archive define what we as photography scholars searching for the works and histories like those of Helmer and her successors are able to discover in the archives? And how does the archival encounter impact not only the possibilities of making these women visible in history, but also of making local histories richer and more inclusive by engaging with past through photographs? When I first visited this archive in 2013 with the intention to study the works by the Grimstad women photographers, I was in for a huge disappointment. Because the material was practically unavailable, the glass plate images had not yet been scanned, and they were in complete disorder. But then I returned almost a decade later in 2022, and still the process of scanning these images had only just begun. So keep in mind that my presentation here is based only on the study of the limited images that have so far been scanned. But as Joan Swartz reminds us, the encounter with the archive is necessarily also an encounter on a human level. It's an encounter with the archivist. And in the conference in Bologna, we also talked about how you have to exert some kind of archival diplomacy as a researcher, and you all know what that means, I think. They are, she contends, the keepers of ground-level institutional memory, as the ones who make important choices concerning the material and who fill the boxes and write the finding aids, she says. Importantly, she also points to how their professional choices are dependent on their training. While some are academically trained, others may be recruited due to different kinds of practical competence or simply as volunteers. Schwartz's observations regarding the importance of the archivist in the archival encounter were confirmed by my own research experiences in Cuba, where my search for the women photographers in the Fløystad archive was facilitated by Cubans past and present photo archivists Tore Knudsen and Hannele Foss. They provided me with knowledge about the archive, its difficult accessibility, history, and current states, based on their different kinds of backgrounds and practical involvement. Markedly, such differences in training and experience also seem to have informed their respective choices in relation to the archival treatment of the collection of the women photographers. Well, Knudsen was recruited to work as a photo archivist based on his professional background as a photographer. Foss, the woman here, she is not only trained as a photographer, but also as a historian. Knudsen, now retired, has followed the collection since it was donated to Grimstad municipality. Prior to the donation, it had for some years been stored in the attic of the house where Martha Myrslo once lived and had her studio. He recalls how birds and insects had left their traces on the collection when the staff from the local museum came to remove it. The collection was first relocated to an old museum building and later for safer tracing to the basement of Grimstad's town hall. Its original order was gradually changed every time it was moved. In 1990, Knudsen was employed to catalogue the collection. As he somehow regretfully states, he didn't get any training as an archivist prior to doing this work. So he established a system where the glass plates were organized according to size, to their size. And that is something that we wouldn't dream about doing today. So not at all according to their creators. And this is the way they are still kept in this archive. So when the collection was moved to be deposited in the Cuban archive, it went through a process which drew to a progression of the new archive and museums building involved several temporary storage solutions and risky transportations. As a result, a series of different stages of unstable archival conditions and lacking measures to systematize the collection, it is now very difficult to establish the provenance of each of the plate negatives. The individual works by the 5 different women photographers represented in this collection are consequently hard to identify. While the photographers' own handwritten catalogues, where they noted the names of the customers and the dates of each recording, could have served as keys for such identification, these documents are unfortunately lost or mislaid in the archive. Nobody finds them. As a result, each of these individual women's life work is now anonymously submerged into one undifferentiated and seemingly inaccessibly whole. The only potential tools for individual identification of their images are, as Knudsen admits, looking for details, such as, for example, the different handwritings, in the markings of the plates and the systematic dissimilarities between the paper wrappings the photographers have employed to protect their negatives. These are also the kind of tools that I've used when studying this material. To have the collection completely scanned would, of course, have made such identification much easier. For example, by systematically studying and comparing studio interiors, fashion details, stylistic idiosyncrasies in lighting, posing, etc. But as earlier mentioned, the process of scanning has only just started. It is Cuban's current photo archivist Handler Foss who has initiated this process of reorganizing, cataloging, and ultimately also scanning the images. Sadly, she really struggles to raise funding for this kind of work. Notably, the images that each of the women photographers in Grimstad produce answer to the different demands of their clients and form part of the lived experience of a small town population. Yet, as the photographs have circulated in time, they have transcended their original production context. As archival objects, they now form part of a larger totality which confront us with the photographic history of a small town community. According to Elizabeth Edwards, the insistent presence of photographs is an unwelcome reminder how little of the past has been seen by historians. She also argues that photographs potentially can establish correctives or to assumptions and connections to different pulses. So, in the last part of my presentation, I will discuss what this may entail in practice. How can the works by Myrslo and the other women photographers who lived and worked in Grimstad work as reminders of unnoticed past? And how can they challenge existing historiographies by offering alternative ways of accounting for the small town's history? But before I discuss that, I think we should take a closer look at how the small town has been portrayed in existing history volumes. Already in 1960, Grimstad, the town city council, initiated a local history project, which resulted in a publication of an almost 800-page big volume about Grimstad, the town history, in 1927. This voluminous local history work of about 800 pages encompasses chapters on its topography, first inhabitants from the Stone Ages to the Vikings, relics of ancient times, it's in the town's historic importance as a harbor for trade and shipbuilding, culture, history of its fleet, local customs, Henrik Ibsen, the great author's time in Grimstad, and the presentation of its clergy over the centuries, city council, communication, schools, Christian organization, judiciary, postal system, doctors and hospital, banks, crafts, industry, press, organizations, temperance, choirs, gymnastics, sailing, etc., and so on. And notably, apart from Elizabeth Helmer's short account about women's history and daily life in Grimstad, which amount to about 8 pages out of 800, well hidden in the last section of the book, nearly all chapters are written by men. These authors forefront the achievements of Grimstad's male population as shipbuilders, sea captains, city council members, priests, teachers and headmasters, apothecaries, dentists, doctors, bank directors. And their accounts are richly illustrated by portraits in which the great men of the small town are immortalized through the quieter achievements by Grimstad's women photographers. Yeah, I'm soon done. While the volume, which was published in a second edition as late as 1994, also contains a 2-page spread on the local photography businesses, most of the women photographers who at that time dominated the sector are only marginally positioned. What, strangely enough, takes up most of the space of the spread is a photograph of the male members of the committee for the celebration of the Norwegian National Day in 1914. As contribution to the local cultural life, their 80-year-long continuous production of images is also largely overshadowed by the local historians' strong interest in the famous author Ibsen's six youthful years as an apothecary and Princess Grimstad, which he later condescendingly referred to as a small and narrow-minded bourgeois society. So, how can photographs be used to speak about a community through images of its inhabitants? Roland Barthes certainly had an opinion of this, as he, with reference to, among others, the German interwar photographer August Sander, claimed that photography has the capacity to essentialize what makes a face into the product of a society and of its history. According to Barthes, great portraitists are able to bring forth what he calls the mask or the face of a society at a certain period of time. Yet, works by lesser-known photographers, such as, for example, the Grimstad women photographers, can similarly be construed as collective portraits or the mask of the community in which their creators lived and worked. Notably, such images, such ways of construing historical experience as faces of its time are, as later research has shown, by no means neutral. It has been claimed that Sander's images more specifically promote the worldviews of the middle class and therefore not provide unlimited access to social truths. Different from Sander's portraiture, Myrslo and her predecessors' photographs were not created with departure from lofty sociological and artistic ambitions. Still, like Sander's images, their work is colored by the photographer's own positionalities, their ways of seeing the world, and perhaps also privileging certain voices. It's only when the glass plates archives are completely scanned that we can start analyzing which social layers, which voices that are privileged in the Fløystad archive. Rather by voicing the local population, the photographs form statements which contribute to create history in their own right. The archive makes it possible to trace the people who place themselves in front of the camera through entire lifetimes. They carry with them personal histories, family sagas, and account for a wide range of human relationships, of the loving as well the more problematic, difficult kind. They also have potential to work productively in dialogue with the macro-level histories about the town's economic, political, institutional, and cultural development. Rather, by voicing the local population, the photographs form statements which contribute to create history in their own right. The archive makes it possible to trace the people who place themselves in front of the camera through entire lifetime. They carry with, I said that, the photography archives open up for alternative and very much concrete experience of the history of Grimstad as a community and its cornerstone industries, fisheries, shipping, boat building, tourism, and horticulture. It offers tactile and seductive close-up encounters, for instance, with the sailors and fishermen who spent their lives on the sea, the boat builders in their workshop, the faces and bodies of the women, children, and men who in the past frequented the town's busy trading streets, or the flowering meadows of daffodils at the thriving horticultural business. But it also turns the notion of a layered society into something very manifest and real. For example, in the portrait of the factory owner's son, posing as if having the world at his feet. Or, just as important, the photographs may also have the capacity to draw attention to and contribute to reconstruct difficult and overlooked histories, for example, of the vulnerable presence of queer lives in the small town community. In all these ways, and many more, the archive of the women photographers presents itself as a highly relevant in relation to the overall policy of the institution, which is directed towards providing a complete as possible image of the region's history and societal development, and still they don't raise funding to scan these images. So therefore, and I will end by this, the archive's unique potential for a more inclusive, colourful, and intriguing future history writing, therefore, remains to be recognized. Thank you.